The heavy oak doors swung open, letting in a sharp November chill that cut through the grand hall of the Gilded Steer. Warm golden light from the chandeliers spilled over exposed brick walls, and the reddish-brown leather chairs shimmered like bourbon under its glow. The scent of grilled meat, aged wine, and expensive perfume mingled in the air, luxurious yet distant. Silverware clinked gently against ivory porcelain. And then he walked in. Arthur Vance, the founder, now an old man, with silver hair, wearing a worn tweed coat that smelled faintly of mothballs. His faded leather shoes squeaked weakly against the polished wooden floor he had once chosen himself. No one noticed. The young hostess gave him a brief glance before returning to her phone as if he were just some lost passerby. Arthur moved slowly past the glittering tables, quietly finding a seat near the window. As he sat down, the leather chair let out a soft creak. He pulled out a handkerchief, gently wiped the table, then looked up and scanned the room, the very room he had tiled by hand 30 years ago, where he had picked every bulb, tested every glass. And then came a scene that stabbed him like a fresh knife. The doors opened again. A stylish young couple stepped in. Kyle, the restaurant manager, hair slicked back with gel, immediately rushed to greet them. "Welcome back, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. Your favorite table is ready." His voice dripped with syrup, smile wide and polished. Arthur watched, then sighed softly. In his mind, an old whisper echoed, "I chose this oak because it felt warm. Why does it feel so cold now? I picked these lights so people would feel welcome. Why do I feel like an intruder?" Kyle caught sight of Arthur. A quick glance, then he turned away. No greeting, no acknowledgement. Arthur raised a hand gently to call for service. No one came. Several minutes passed before Kyle himself approached, clearly reluctant. "Are you sure you want to dine here, sir?" he said, with a dry smile. "Even our cheapest dish might chew up that pension of yours." Arthur didn't blink. 145-day dry-aged porterhouse, medium rare. Kyle smirked, scribbled quickly into his pad. As he turned to leave, Arthur heard muffled giggles from the bar. A young waitress whispered to a co-worker, "Look at that old guy. Thinks this is Denny's or something?" Arthur didn't react. He just sat there, hands folded quietly on the table, eyes fixed on the wall where a black-and-white portrait of himself still hung, a young man with a hopeful smile, standing proudly next to the first grill at the Gilded Steer. But now he was just a ghost. A banished king sitting quietly inside the castle he had built with his own hands. A castle that no longer remembered his name. The giggles from the bar slowly faded. Arthur no longer heard them. In his mind, there was only the sound of metal striking wood, the solid thud of a hammer echoing from 30 years ago. He saw himself younger, leaner, gripping the wooden mallet his father had passed down. Not in a suit, but in a sweat-soaked t-shirt and frayed jeans, hands calloused. Back then, the Gilded Steer was nothing but a steel frame in a freezing construction site, the floor still scattered with sand and rubble. But in Arthur's eyes, it was already a cathedral in the making. He remembered one winter night, wind sneaking through every gap in the walls. Arthur was painting the first wall by flashlight. Helen, his wife, gone now for many years, showed up with 2 sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. They sat together on the steps eating dinner, surrounded by the smell of paint and brick. Helen laughed, her voice warm, like a hearth. "One day, Arthur, people will pay $100 just to sit in this room." He believed it because she did. His American dream didn't start with investors or connections. It began with one woman's belief and the hands of an immigrant son. His father, a stubborn Irishman, had once told him, A cook doesn't just make food, he creates memories. And the way you treat the meat is the way you treat the people eating it. The famous porterhouse wasn't born from a five-star chef. It came from his mother's kitchen. Sear it in real beef fat, crush the garlic by hand, and whip the butter until it's rich and fragrant. Arthur tested it 14 nights straight until he perfected a steak that could bring a laborer and a senator to the same table and erase the line between them. He remembered opening night. No staff, no VIPs, just him, Helen, and two strangers who wandered in to escape the rain. Arthur grilled the steaks himself, wiped down the tables, poured the wine, and walked them to the door with a smile. They left a $10 tip. That was the night he knew he had been right all along. The Gilded Steer didn't earn its name through press releases. It earned it through the stories told by people who had tasted kindness. Arthur blinked and returned to the present. Around him were crystal glasses, $1,000 suits, and cold laughter stripped of memory. But he knew one thing for sure: the hammer still lived inside him. It was vibrating now, and its echo, faint as it was clawing its way through the dust of time, trying to awaken the sleeping soul of a place that once bore his name. A sharp clink broke the air. Arthur turned his head. A porcelain plate had been set down hard on the table beside him. A stylish young couple, drenched in expensive perfume, had arrived just minutes ago and were already sipping wine and sampling appetizers like royalty. Kyle stood beside them, his polished smile in place, introducing each bottle of wine like he was some expert flown in from Napa Valley. Arthur sat still, eyes following every movement. Kyle's politeness was selective, offered only to those he deemed worth the effort. The rest, this place ran like a machine, cold, efficient, soulless, and Kyle was its central gear. A young waiter brushed past Arthur's chair without a word. He nearly bumped into him but didn't apologize, but that was nothing. What truly stung came seconds later when the same boy deliberately shoulder-checked an older woman carrying a tray of drinks. "Watch it, Grandma," he snapped, walking off. The woman nearly stumbled, struggling to keep her balance. On the tray were 2 martinis and a plate of oysters. Not a drop spilled, but Arthur saw it beneath her tight-lipped smile. Something cracked. Kyle had seen the whole thing. He smirked, then turned away. Arthur narrowed his eyes, studying the woman more closely. It was Eleanor, or Ellie, as some had mockingly called her. Her silver hair was neatly pinned up her worn apron, tied with care. She didn't rush like the others. She moved with a quiet focus, like someone holding the rhythm of the entire room in her breath. As the jazz music softened, Arthur watched Ellie approach a table where an elderly woman sat, dining alone. She didn't bring food, didn't refill water. She paused for just a second, smiled gently. "Your shawl is beautiful. That shade of blue really brings out your eyes." The woman looked surprised, then smiled back. Not because of the compliment, but because in that moment she was seen, recognized. Something so many have forgotten how to give in this world. Arthur saw that too, and he also noticed Ellie's left hand wrapped in a soft medical brace, half hidden under her sleeve. Each time she lifted a plate, she winced ever so slightly. No one noticed. No one asked. At the bar, a group of young servers burst into laughter. "Kyle's gonna boot her soon," one snorted. "She's slower than a tortoise." Arthur tilted his head. Kyle stood nearby, listening. He didn't stop them, just chuckled quietly along. This machine didn't run on indifference alone. It was greased with cruelty. And Ellie, she was the last gear, still holding on to a drop of compassion. Arthur knew more clearly than ever, if this place still had a soul, that soul was being crushed day by day. 45 minutes passed. Arthur remained still, his dry eyes fixed on the neatly folded napkin in front of him. No one asked if he wanted more water. No one apologized for the delay. The restaurant spun on full of laughter, clinking glasses, and hurried footsteps that never came his way. Then finally, the young waiter, the same one who had bumped into Ellie, approached and nearly slammed the plate onto Arthur's table. No greeting, not even eye contact. Arthur looked down. There it was, the 45-day dry-aged porterhouse, his signature, his lifelong pride. But what he saw felt like blasphemy. The steak was dark and charred at the edges, grey and dry in the center. No garnish, no proper sauce, just a piece of meat carelessly thrown on a plate. Arthur didn't rush. He sat up straight, inhaling deeply, an old habit, as if to catch the scent of butter garlic and oak smoke. But this time there was nothing. No aroma, no memories. Just the cold stench of overcooked fat and faintly burnt meat. Elsewhere in the restaurant, in the harsh glow of fluorescent kitchen lights, a ticket labeled Table 12. Porterhouse MR lay crumpled on the floor. The head chef yawned, glanced at it, and tossed it to a line cook glued to his phone. For the old guy. Knock it out and clock out. No grill temperature check, no seasoning. Just a hunk of meat, slapped onto high heat, flipped once, and yanked off like garbage. Arthur picked up the knife. He felt the weight of the wooden handle once, as familiar as a friend's handshake. The blade touched the meat, not the soft, clean shh of a perfect porterhouse, but a dry, splintering scratch like tearing old wood. He cut a small piece and brought it to his mouth. He chewed. No sweetness of aged beef, no buttery melt of properly rendered fat. Just a mass of dry strands, tough as old leather, flavorless, soulless. He looked up. His gaze landed on the black-and-white portrait of himself hanging on the main wall, a younger Arthur, eyes ablaze, standing beside the first grill with sleeves rolled high, a smile full of fire and hope. Now that image hung like a cruel joke, a promise betrayed. This steak wasn't a mistake. It was a statement. No one cares anymore. No one respects what he built. No one believes food is a ritual. Arthur set the knife down, carefully, slowly, as if closing the chapter of a life. This wasn't dinner. This was a funeral. And the plate before him, a gravestone etched with the name of Faith Pride and everything he once fought to preserve. Arthur still sat there, his hand resting on the table, eyes locked on the porterhouse as if it were a relic from a world that no longer existed. The room around him blurred like a watercolor painting, soaked in rain. Voices, jazz music, clinking glasses, they all melted into a meaningless hum of white noise. He was about to rise, to walk away, to accept defeat. And then a soft voice cut through the emptiness. "Sir." He turned. It was Ellie. She didn't smile to appease. She didn't pour water. She didn't ask if he wanted dessert. She simply stood there, one hand clutching the corner of her apron, and her eyes, achingly sincere, looked straight into his. I'm truly sorry. For the delay, for the food, for everything." Her voice was quiet, but steady. No excuses, no blaming the shift, the kitchen, or the crowd. Just ownership spoken from the heart. This restaurant used to be better than this. Arthur gave a slight nod, his chest tightening as if someone had gripped it, then let go. Not because of the apology, but because she was right. This place had once been more than food and service. It had been a belief. Ellie bowed her head and placed the bill on the table. But as she did, her hand brushed the edge of the napkin, and with a barely noticeable motion, she slipped a folded piece of paper beneath it. Their eyes met. She said nothing more, just gave a soft nod, then turned, and walked away. Arthur waited until she disappeared behind the counter. His trembling hand reached for the edge of the napkin. He opened the note. The handwriting was feminine old and slightly shaky, but clear. I know you're not just another customer. No one complains with silence the way you just did. If you're someone who can make a difference, please come back. This place is dying. Arthur read it again and again. His heart skipped a beat, his fist clenched, wrinkling the edges of the paper. In his eyes, something flickered, not anger, hope. Ellie's gesture wasn't just a plea, it was a risk. If Kyle found out, she could lose her job. But she did it anyway, because she believed this place could still be saved, believed he could be the one to save it. And in that moment, Arthur Vance made a decision. He was no longer a ghost, come to mourn a ruin. He would return, not as a forgotten man cast aside, but as the keeper of the last flame, still burning in the ashes of his legacy. That night, Arthur didn't go home. He boarded bus 22 and sat in the back row, Ellie's note still in his coat pocket, soft now from being clenched too many times. Outside the window, the streetlights drifted past in reverse, like streaks of memory. Inside the bus, only a few silent passengers slumped in exhaustion. A few seats ahead, Ellie leaned her forehead against the glass. Eyes closed, her right hand gently massaging the left wrist, still wrapped in a brace. No one looked at her. No one knew she had just served for 8 hours straight, with a throbbing pain in her bones and a fear that hurt even more. Back in her small apartment tucked inside an aging building in West Chicago, she opened the fridge. Inside, a half-eaten box of spaghetti, a bruised apple, and a folded slip from the clinic. At the top corner, 3 words were underlined in red urgent: discuss results. Tomorrow she'd need to leave work early for the appointment. Part of her feared the worst, but the rest just wanted to hear the doctor say, "It's just a mild inflammation. A few pills, you'll be fine." The next morning, Ellie arrived early. Just like always. She polished every glass, realigned every set of silverware, though no one had asked. When Kyle walked in, coffee in one hand, eyes glued to his iPad, she stepped up quietly. "Excuse me, Kyle. Would it be possible to switch to the evening shift tomorrow? I have an important doctor's appointment." Kyle didn't look up. "No. Schedule's tight. Just half a shift. They said I said no." He cut her off. "If you can't do the job, maybe it's time you didn't have one." Ellie stood still, swallowing something bitter and sharp. Understood. She turned away, her steps slower than usual. Arthur, seated in the corner, had seen it all. What boiled his blood wasn't just a bad manager. It was a system that used power to trample dedication. Then the young waiter, the one who'd shoved Ellie, brushed past again, deliberately bumping her shoulder. She staggered slightly, nearly dropping her tray of water. He laughed loud enough for the whole bar to hear. "Old lady should just retire already." A few others chuckled along. Kyle glanced over, but said nothing. Arthur's grip tightened on the edge of his seat. But Ellie didn't lash out. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She bent down instead and picked up a napkin that had fallen from a nearby table, wiped it clean, folded it, placed it back. She wasn't fighting to be admired. She wasn't sacrificing for glory. She was holding the line for what was right in a world that had forgotten what that even meant. Arthur understood. Then firing Kyle would only clear out the trash. But if he truly wanted to reignite the soul of this restaurant, he needed to hand the torch to someone worthy of carrying it. And that person was quietly wiping down tables in the middle of a storm no one else could see. The next morning, the oak doors swung open once more, and this time they didn't carry a chill, but the weight of 30 years bottled up. Arthur Vance stepped inside. No more worn tweed coat. He wore a finely tailored grey suit, a deep blue silk tie, and shoes polished to a flawless shine. But what silenced the room wasn't the clothes, it was the presence. He didn't walk in as a guest. He returned as an owner. The hostess dropped her phone. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. At the bar, Kyle turned pale. "Call the entire staff out here," Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud, but it rang like a church bell, clear, steady, impossible to ignore. Within minutes, every employee had gathered. No one dared breathe too loudly. "I was here 2 nights ago," Arthur began, his eyes sweeping across each face. "I didn't say who I was. I didn't ask for anything. I just watched." He paced slowly, like a professor walking between rows of students. "I saw a guest ignored. I saw mockery. I saw a meal ruined. And I saw an employee pushed, insulted, and denied basic decency right in front of you all." Kyle stood frozen. The young waiter from before stared at the floor. "You," Arthur pointed. "Did you shove Ellie the other night?" The boy stammered, I didn't mean to." "Did you apologize?" "No." Arthur nodded. "Greatness doesn't come from never stumbling. It comes from knowing when to bow your head and say you're sorry." The air thickened. Then Arthur turned to Ellie. "Ellie, would you please step forward?" She hesitated, then approached, her hands gripping the edge of her apron. 2 nights ago, when everyone else turned their back on this place's soul, you were the only one who bent down and picked it up." He unpinned a small badge from his lapel, the original emblem of the Gilded Steer, cast in brass, only 3 in existence, and carefully pinned it onto Ellie's apron. "You're not just an employee, you're the soul keeper of this place." No one spoke, but their eyes said everything. Arthur turned to Kyle, and his voice was steel. "You made cruelty the standard. You snuffed out kindness. There's no place for you here. You're fired. Effective immediately." Kyle opened his mouth, but no one stood up for him. No one even looked his way. He gathered his things and slipped out the door like smoke after a fire. Once the doors shut behind him, Arthur faced the team. "Today, we're not just changing management. We're changing how we treat one another. The soul of this restaurant doesn't live on the menu. It lives in the smallest actions every single day." Applause filled the room, not from fear, but because for the first time in a long time they felt inspired. 1 month later, the oak doors of the Gilded Steer opened once more, but this time they welcomed golden morning sunlight instead of cold winds. Inside, everything had changed. The arrogance and chill were gone. In their place were genuine laughter, brisk yet gentle footsteps, and the soft, inviting scent of freshly brewed coffee made from newly roasted beans. Ellie stood at the entrance now as head supervisor. Her tailored cream suit replaced the old uniform, but she still tied the apron around her waist, a quiet reminder she was, and always would be, a servant at heart. A young couple walked in, slightly unsure of themselves. Ellie gave a warm smile. "Welcome to the Gilded Steer. We're honored to serve you today." The new staff, some former employees, now transformed others, fresh faces, full of purpose, moved in quiet rhythm. No gossip, no missed details. In the kitchen, the porterhouse had returned to its rightful form, tender, rich, and grilled the way Arthur once taught with pride, not a timer. Every morning, Ellie led the pre-shift meeting. No speeches, just one question. Who will we make feel important today? One afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson returned. They were greeted not with flattery, but with sincerity. As they sat at their usual table, Mr. Thompson leaned over and whispered to his wife, "Do you feel that the soul of this place? It's back." Across the street, Arthur leaned against a lamppost, a cup of coffee in hand. He watched through the window as Ellie guided a new server, showing her how to fold a napkin with corners crisp as a courteous hello. He didn't walk inside. He didn't need to. He knew now his legacy was in the right hands. But then the restaurant door opened. Ellie stepped out and spotted him. She smiled and gave a small wave. "Come on in, Mr. Vance," she called. This morning's coffee was brewed with heart. Arthur smiled, crossing the street slowly. He was no longer a ghost. He was a man who had reclaimed his soul. If you've ever doubted that quiet kindness could change the world, remember this story. And if you want more stories that touch the heart, subscribe to Toch Story, where every tale is a flame of warmth in the everyday.